wanted to see if you guys would mind, each of us kind of just giving our thoughts on what a fan versus an anti-fan is, because it's something I really want to try to do regularly, where like we kind of break down the terms that we use, because it's kind of the opposite of what the right does, right? Like they just throw words around, and they're hiding all these intentions and their dog whistles and stuff like that. And so I think it's important to kind of do the opposite, right? To like put it all out there. This is what we're talking about whenever we say these things. There's definitions for fan, right, and fandom, right? And probably how I think of it overlaps with that somewhat. But generally, I just consider my fandom, my personal fandom, to be my personal connection to a thing, and like how it's influenced me, how I've related to it, how it's inspired me or comforted me or give me escape or whatever. And then like fandom, the proper term fandom, which is about a community. And I take that pretty literally, especially now that we have like the Discord that we're trying to build a community there. I think about what would a community be like if I was literally building a community like of homes in IRL, so to speak. And how do we make sure that we protected each other and looked out for each other and stuff like that. So that's how I see a fandom, is and what I hope it could be. Like people have said to me before, "Oh, actual fandom, you think you're the only way to do fandom?" It's like it's not about me. I'm not describing myself with my channel. I'm describing like a kind of an aspiration, an ideal that I'd like to aspire to for like everybody. An actual fandom where it's like people are actually a community, and it's not just about only about our selfish fucking entitled feelings about a thing, right? Which a lot of people seem to prioritize. And yeah, you go far enough down on the spectrum of that entitlement and stuff like that, and you start introducing your really cringe politics and bigotry and biases and like toxic possessiveness and stuff like that, and that's when you get an anti-fan.
Like I kind of approached this from almost like a film criticism standpoint, because like I did this YouTube thing kind of because I like talking about movies, and I reviewed movies for a while, and I still do review them on my podcast much more casually. But what I noticed was essentially, I noticed people were essentially calling stuff bad before they've seen it, just because maybe a trailer's come out or there's been some casting calls saying, "Oh, it's bad," and then making litanies of content bashing it before they've even seen it. Because that's one of the things that always drove me nuts. Because you can't actually judge something really properly until you've seen it. The best you could do is say, "Hey, this reviewer I know dislikes it, and they're reliable." That's about the best you could do, unless you've seen it. But there's also this second angle where even if you've seen it and you've spent all this time bashing on it, you can't turn around on your channel and start saying it's good. So like if I look at like not a fan, but just an honest person, it's like whenever you go into a movie, you just give it what's the term? You give it an honest
Fair shake.
Brain farting on the term. Yeah, fair shake. Yeah. There's a specific term, but like go into it with an open mind.
Yeah.
Because I've done my time as a proper film critic, and now I'm more of a casual film critic. I see lots of movies every year. Never ever do I want one to be bad. Not a single goddamn one. I want to see every single movie be fucking 10 out of 10 brilliant. Because I don't like watching bad movies. But I see plenty of bad movies. But the goal is to just go into it with an open mind. So if you go into a piece of media with an open mind, I think that's I think that's that's what a fan should do. That's what honestly most anybody should do. But if you go into it with the idea of just hating it just immediately, if you're going into it hating it because you hate a trailer or because you hate some casting choice, that's an anti-fan. I'm sorry. There's no other way to describe it. So that's how I would sum it up.
For me, just when you take the word fan by itself, to me that's always been a lot more about like the inner feeling that I personally have towards the media, my own attachment to something. But when I think about the distinction between a fan and an anti-fan, it has more to do with you engage with it rather than how you like feel about it, because that's a bit difficult to really like discern from people when we're in the discussion of like a fan and an anti-fan. So it's more for me about the engagement, whether you're engaging with the media that you're a fan of positively or negatively. So it's like positively, and that doesn't mean that you like everything or that you have to say something positive about the things that you like. If you're a Star Wars fan, for example, you don't need to like every piece of Star Wars content, right? You can be critical of parts of it, you can not like some of it, and you're free to talk about that, because I also think, because positive engagement with like something that you're a fan of is not just about dick riding it, or just being positive and only saying it's how it's perfect and everything. It's also about why it's not working for you. It's like why is this not something that I particularly enjoy, even despite being a fan of it. Um, and I guess it comes from even when you're critical of something that you're a fan of, it comes from a bit of what Bob says, is like it comes from a place of wanting it to be better. Loving this franchise, but then not liking something, but it's like you want it to be good. Whereas the kind of negative engagement comes from the people who just, I guess, want it to be bad. Especially the easiest people to call anti-fans are like the grifters, because they they make money off of franchises being bad. The people who talk about wokeness and all this representation and how it's a bad thing. They look for things to get angry about. They're looking forward to the next season of Rings of Power because they know that they'll make a lot of money by calling it the worst thing ever, the worst woke garbage, despite never giving it a chance from the beginning. That's something that I see as being an anti-fan, because they're not contributing towards making the media that they're supposed to be fans of better. They profit off of its downfall. That's what they hope for. And that to me is just not something that a fan would do.
This is tough pill to swallow time. I think a lot of anti-fans, if you're watching, you're going to clip this, probably going to come after me for this. I'm going to talk about that first, and then I'll give my idea of what a fan is. So anti-fans have what I consider to be internalized shame about loving something that is very juvenile, because they feel like everything needs to be modern and adult and oriented towards their kind of the things that they love, because they have shame about liking something that they perceive being made for kids. So as they get older, they slowly get more jaded about things they used to love, because they have grown up and the things they love have not. And I think a lot of that is internalized. And they can't grasp the concept that things that are being made for people that were kids when they loved it. So they try to find reasons behind things that they would not have questioned when they were originally watching these things that they love and they're nostalgic for. So there's a lot of internalized shame in that. So they hate watch stuff because it's not what they loved when they were kids, but they want it to be. And now all they can do is make fun of it, because they think that makes them look more mature. It makes them feel like they're above whatever it is they're watching, or that they have grown up and the things that they love have not. And I do believe there's a little bit of that. And that's just in the back of my mind, that I think there is a little bit of shame in them for one. And this is why they come after fans like us and other people that love things, because they consider us to be juvenile in their eyes. They consider it to be silly and funny to make fun of characters who represent today's youth, because in their eyes, the only youth that matters to them is the one that they saw when they were growing up. Yeah. And we have talked about that a little bit, with like the 90s being an era that a lot of people our age go back to and go, that was the pinnacle of this type of art when it comes to like comics and animation. So I believe there's a little bit of shame inside of them. And I also think that they don't want to like anything at the end of the day. I don't think anything that ever comes out is something they want to like. I even think the stuff that they celebrate, like Super Mario Brothers or Top Gun or whatever it might be, I think in the beginning, their initial reaction to it is, how can I dislike this? That's how I think they look at this media, because the minute they realize that, oh, people may actually like it, the people that support me, I need to pretend that I like it. I need to pretend that it's something that I care about. Because let's be honest, Super Mario Brothers, it made a lot of money, but it was a family friendly cartoon.
Yeah,
That's pretty much what it was.
based
And
on a
they
huge IP. I mean,
exactly, and people knew it was going to make a bunch of money, but using that as like a hammer to nail things into other corporations that are doing the exact same thing tells me that they wanted to hate it originally and they had to come up with a reason why they like it. And we saw that already. Some of the channels did this like hot and cold thing with some of these properties we've seen over the years. So I believe that's what makes an anti-fan, somebody that just generally has grown out of the things they love and they cannot accept that those things may not be for them anymore. And so they just continue to like this hate cycle. As far as fans go, it's really simple. You love something, you celebrate what you love, you engage with it as a hobby, you love talking about with your friends, and you're arguing about stuff like who would win a battle, Superman or Captain America, not whether or not one of them is bisexual. Because that's not an argument that fans would actually have, in my opinion. Because it's just a dumb thing to argue about. But I mean, like, I remember the days when you would argue about like the X-Men versus Teen Titans, and they actually did a crossover and everybody loved it. And there was no arguing about what kind of costume a character had or whether or not they dyed their hair or if one of them was coded to be gay. Like, nobody argued about that stuff. But now we've reached a point where that's the topic of conversation because I think a lot of these people have grown out of this. And in my opinion, they just need to move on, especially with like the Star Wars fandom. It's extremely toxic.
Fandom stuff has been in my, I've been surrounded by it. Literally my earliest memories are like, Star Wars and stuff like that. My older brothers were deep into that stuff when I came along. And like, we had conversations like you're talking about. Like we would get very impassioned about like what, superhero could do what. And of course I would always lose the argument because my brother knew more about the stuff than me, which is kind of where I started originally, I think, not liking this idea of gatekeeping and like people lording information over somebody. But like still we would have, arguments about who could win, but it was always like based on the characters and based on, what's right there on the page and not like some idea of some, fucking force of agenda being put into it and representing something that isn't there on the page. And I don't know, man, it's really weird. It's like when I started seeing that stuff popping up in fandom, it was really bizarre to me. And that's kind of what led me down this path of like wanting to understand it at first and like wanting to, originally I was like, when I started seeing stuff claims by like Comicsgate and whatnot, I'm like, I was not reading comics at the time. So I was like, whoa, are they really doing this? Like, making comics bad because they're blah, blah, blah. And I'm, start reading comics again. So like, really, thank you, Comicsgate, for one thing. Because I look into it, I'm like, wait a second. No, some of these comics are bad or not for me. Some of them aren't very good. Some of them are great. And I'm not seeing anything that's representative of what they're saying that's anything out of the ordinary. Like, yes, there was a push for, in Marvel in particular, they, introduced a lot of people of color and female characters, versions, legacy characters and stuff. And that to me was just like, oh, cool. So they're actually doing something they should have been doing a long time ago. And we looked on the Fapcast, we talked about the comics code and why that was actually a big part of why that stuff was not introduced in comics more regularly before that. But yeah, it's
like their own version of coping. Like their engagement with these things now is them coping with the fact that it's not made for them anymore.
Yeah,
that's pretty much what it is.
No, I did not say this. It's not what I said at all. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'll respond to that later.
No. Just I now it's all coming to my mind. Like I'm sort of like just thinking about it a little bit on what you said. Is I think all of this anti-fandom rhetoric we see is a cope. I think it's like this weird cope where it's like, you're not making stuff for me anymore. You're making it for a younger generation, and now I'm going to be mad at it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what it is.
Pure cope.
Set me up.
So they say that other people are coping to what they're saying, but they're just telling on themselves, really, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all ties into like I've got a underlying theory that I've been endlessly fascinated with what makes people human beings. We're generally the same thing, more or less, and like how can one be like what we are, what we advocate for, and one be like a fascist, right? How does that happen? And what I ultimately got to was like emotional intelligence, or maturity, if you want to call it that, and just like an underdeveloped sense of it. And that speaks to what you were saying, DJ, about like that shame, because shame is something that if you don't have like some sense of developed emotional, maturity, you're not going to process that shame well. Yeah, everybody has shame, but like if you don't know what to do with it, if you just kind of stuff it down, and you're gonna react pretty shitty.
Be proud of what you love. It's June. Be proud of what you love. There's no reason to be ashamed about it. So it's a prideful month. But I also feel like it's like when you're around a certain group of friends and you know that they don't like something, and you're the one person that likes it, and you're like, oh no, that stuff is silly. I don't watch that anymore. And then you're secretly, going home streaming it after the party. That's what it reminds me of, is that you're putting on this illusion that you don't, or that you can't possibly like that because you're grown up now. And so
it's it's in that way, like in a way, I'm kind of I've a lot of ways actually, I'm grateful that I am on the spectrum, because I think that is like a big reason why I've just not had that concern for the most part. I mean, I definitely, when I was like in middle school, maybe when I was really insecure and shit, puberty and all that, like I definitely tried to hide my nerdiness and whatnot a lot more. But like, other than that, I'm just like, dude, I don't give a fuck. You don't like this shit, I think it's awesome.
I think that as fans also, you don't advocate for something to not exist. I mean, I think that's completely unethical as a fan, like to go, hey, the stuff that I love isn't happening anymore, so you can't have the thing that you love. Like, that's just a weird way to look at something.
Well, then there's also the question of, is it even true that it's not happening anymore, or is it that you have changed in a way that you aren't fully cognizant of, right? Which I think is often the case these days.
Yeah, true. And because like nostalgia is a very strong thing. Like I've plenty of times gone back to like play a video game from my childhood, being like, oh, this is the best game of all time, and it's like horrendous, and like it just doesn't hit. And like sometimes you just grow apart from the things that you used to like a lot, and it can be difficult. But it's like, but some people just choose to cope with it in really harmful ways, both for other people but also for themselves.
Batman Forever was my favorite movie ever for a little while. Okay, like, it's we all grow.
I in my mind, I was just thinking how Final Fantasy VII, great fucking story, but you look back on the graphics of that game.
Yeah. No, for me, it was Thundercats. I loved Thundercats as a kid, right? And the newer versions came out, and I was like, oh man, it makes me want to go back because I have all of the DVDs. So I was like, I'm going to go back and watch them. And I put in the first episode, and after about 10 minutes, I was like, I love this as a kid, but it's not hitting for me as an adult. So I turned it off. But it's one of those things where I didn't go on this rant about Thundercats because I realized that it wasn't really for me anymore. I still love it, and it's really important. I'm sure a lot of people would still love it too. But yeah, you find things that you grew up with that just aren't what you remember them being. And that's okay.
Million ideas. I mean, it's the exact same thing. I think the difference is like I started using anti-fandom intentionally because I would say chud a lot or whatever, and it's like I still use that sometimes, but anti-fandom I think is the most kind of, like, I guess you could say, clinical word you could use for it. Like it's not meant to be an insult. It's not meant to be chud is a fandom obviously is, but like it's just a description of it in the way that like if a fan is someone who engages with the thing, not always positively, but like they'll critically engage with it in a reasonable way, a fair way. And then a non-fan is just somebody that doesn't fucking pay attention to the thing, right? So there's got to be a third thing, which is an anti-fan. They're paying attention to it, but just all they're doing is shitting on it and in some cases lying about it and advocating like for it to fail and stuff like that. So I think anti-fan is just the most efficient word to use. But
it's a very good word. I got tired of saying anti-woke and anti-SJW. It's just
well, anti-fan sums it up like perfectly.
It sums it up really well.